Hi there, my name is Ellie Horgan and I'm an occupational therapist from CDNT 5 in North Wicklow. Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar on supporting and valuing differences in neurodiverse interaction. Neurodiversity refers to a world where neurological differences are recognised, respected, and celebrated as all other forms of human variation. It is a concept that describes how we all experience the world and think differently due to underlying neurological differences. And neurodiversity describes a range of different thinking styles. Within the CDNTs in CH East, we've been trying to learn and listen to the voices of the neurodiverse community and reflect on our practice to develop approaches which account for different styles of thinking and interaction. In supporting the neurodivergent young people on our caseload, we are trying to keep Samantha Craft's definition at the core of our practice, recognizing natural variations of human brains and minds as a valuable aspect of human diversity, promoting the inclusion of all types of minds to break down the barriers of constraint and recognize differences in neurology, including the way one thinks, the way one processes, the way one behaves, the way one functions and copes and perceives the world. During this webinar, I'm going to be focusing on discussing differences in communication and interaction styles and how we can support young people to build on their strengths while being themselves. I'm also going to be sharing some feedback that we have gathered directly from young people who have been attending our groups and their parents on their perceptions of neurodiverse interaction styles and what helps them to participate in interaction if they choose so. Current research shows that interventions that focus on improving neurotypical social skills do not translate to improved outcomes or quality of life for autistic people. Growing evidence shows that interventions that encourage masking in social interactions can lead to significant mental health needs. Difficulties in autistic communication are alleviated when interacting with other autistic people. Based on this evidence and reports from neurodivergent adults, we're moving away from social skills groups that focus on practicing neurotypical communication skills, such as eye contact and turn-taking, towards communication partner training and peer support groups where children have opportunities to interact with or alongside other neurodiverse children in activities that they enjoy and have opportunities to develop their self-awareness and self-advocacy while building their self-esteem. More than 10 years ago, Damien Milton described the concept of the double empathy problem as difficulties with mutual understanding, often being due to non-autistic people not trying to see the perspective of autistic individuals. This is being shared by the neurodivergent adult population, and as clinicians working with neurodivergent children, we need to account for this in our practice, in particular with regard to goal setting and the language we use around neurodiverse styles and preferences, and what helps neurodiverse children feel safe and regulated in different contexts. Taking all of this into account, we have been reframing goals related to social participation to develop targeted supports in our CDNT, which focus on developing self-awareness of interests and strengths and how to share these with others, learning about different communication styles, developing confidence and self-advocacy, learning about how different environments can impact on their interaction and what helps each individual with communication, and developing perspective taking on both sides. When I think about neurodiversity, I think this image is really powerful. For too long, society has expected neurodivergent young people to adapt and mold themselves to fit into typical social constructs, rather than society adapting to allow young people to develop their strengths while still being themselves. We are all multimodal communicators. Everyone uses a combination of different modalities to communicate, both verbal and non-verbal, including speech, gestures, body language, pictures, text, and objects. What's most important is that the focus is on the effectiveness of the communication message and not how it is conveyed. And we need to support and allow young people to communicate in whichever way works best for them. We all have different styles of communication, and we often gravitate towards people who have similar ways of interacting as us and have similar interests to us. Some young people might have a preference for or find it easier to use a hand gesture or a communication device rather than speech to start an interaction with a friend. Some young people might have an enthusiasm for talking about sports and can use their interest as a way to start a conversation with another person. In the groups we are currently running, we are supporting the young people to identify shared interests with their peers and to engage in activities they enjoy with or alongside their peers using whatever mode of communication they choose. One of the most integral ways we can support our young people to engage in communication is accepting, acknowledging, and providing a multimodal approach to communicating within a total communication environment. This allows a young person to use all methods of communication available, and for many, it may involve switching between different modes depending on the environment. For example, at home, a young person might use gestures and vocalizations, but in school, they may prefer to use a communication device. Within this approach, communication partners model different forms of communication and give the young person the option to choose which mode they prefer. Keeping a neurodiverse-affirmative approach in mind, we are moving away from describing communication styles as appropriate or inappropriate towards using more positive descriptions such as differences or has a preference for. This means that all skills are considered a valid way to communicate. And as a society, we need to move away from teaching typically expected body language towards instead tuning into each young person's style of body language and trying to interpret how they might be feeling. It is important to remember that different cultures have differences in body language, eye contact, and gestures, and to support your young person to advocate for their preferences when in an interaction with another person. Some young people may benefit from us explaining neurotypical body language and how this can come into play in friendships. For example, why keeping a distance is important to some people, why distance varies depending on the person you're interacting with, or reflecting on how another person might be feeling based on their body language. When we think about tone of voice, again, we want to move away from appropriate and inappropriate and allow young people to have their own preferences around these. Again, we need to tune into what your young person might be trying to say with their intonation and check that we are understanding how they are feeling. In terms of understanding others' intonation, some young people may need us to explain what others might mean by using a certain tone of voice. For example, sarcasm. Some young people may find reading between the lines and understanding idioms and expressions challenging and might need us to use direct, concrete language and explain meanings. Sometimes this can impact on friendships and relationships, and your young person might need you to explain social misunderstandings regarding intonation during or after a situation. For example, if a friend uses sarcasm. One way we need to learn to adapt towards our neurodivergent communicators is to take into account that there is more than one way to learn and process language. There are two ways of processing language: analytical, which is what we generally all think of when we think of typical language development, where single words are combined into sentences, and Gestalt, processing and using language in chunks of language rather than individual words. The whole unit has meaning rather than the individual word. Both styles of language have communicative intent, and it is important for us to recognize this and use natural language acquisition strategies. Recently, the shift to natural language acquisition approaches for these children have encouraged focusing on their interest and enjoyment and providing gestalts rather than single units of language. As communication partners, we need to try to focus on creating opportunities for participation in sensory-safe environments where young people feel comfortable and regulated and can engage in activities they are really motivated by alongside peers with similar interests. We need to recognise that neurodiverse young people might prefer engaging in activities along with one other child over group activities, and most children will need time alone also during the day to help them regulate. Use visual supports such as pictures, photos, and objects to help your child stay on topic or on task during interaction and activities. Supports such as visual schedules can also be a good way to help your child with preparing to move from one activity to the next. When you are talking to your child, try to give them one piece of information or ask them one question at a time, and then pause to allow them time to process the information and respond. Try to use simple, concrete language and avoid non-literal terms. Check in with your child that they have understood the information and encourage them to ask for clarification if they need it. Explain non-literal and complex language to them if needed, for example, facial expressions or idioms. Give specific feedback to help reinforce communication skills. For example, I liked how you asked me that question, or well done for standing up for yourself. On your screen, you can see examples of feedback from neurodivergent young people on their interaction styles that we received recently. Some noted that, I find it hard to talk when I'm looking at someone directly. I find it annoying when people use metaphors or expressions like, you can bring a horse to water. I don't like small talk, or I find it hard to join in group conversations. We also receive feedback from neurodivergent young people on things that make it harder for them to participate. They mentioned the temperature in the room, people chatting in the back of the class, or being physically too close to other people. They also spoke about things that help support their interaction, such as, sometimes it's easier to text how I'm feeling so I can plan what I want to say, or fidgeting with gadgets. We've also received feedback from parents on what helps support interaction. They've mentioned being with peers who are straightforward talking, finding like-minded friends who have common interests, feeling like they can be themselves and don't have to fit in, thinking about timing when introducing new activities, giving them choices and helping them to know what to expect, validating their feelings about social situations. One parent mentioned that their child said it was nice to be with people who are like them and noted that everyone is different. Here are some of the sources we used in developing this webinar series. The next webinar will be discussing how sensory differences can impact on participation and interaction in different environments. And our other webinars will cover self-advocacy and perspective taking. For further information on strategies, you can also find a leaflet on the Enable Ireland website with tips from the team on supporting neurodiverse interaction.